I'm Tracy, and welcome to the current vein of my existence, that is, the Neanderthal. Like I think most of us did 6 weeks ago, I set off with pretty good intentions. What I wanted to do, what I had intended to do, was to more fluidly explain the evolution from Homo Heidelbergensis, who from here on out I'm going to call Homo Heidelberg. I wanted to, in more detail, get into the evolution from Homo Heidelberg into Neanderthal into us. So I did. What I thought made sense was to start at the beginning. And for this project, the beginning was to study Homo Heidelberg. So I looked into Homo Heidelberg for a couple weeks, got basic information, skeletal frame, climate change, things like that. Pretty straightforward information. Great, right? Moving on to Neanderthal, who again I thought was going to be straightforward. Pretty common knowledge, right? Neanderthal was a shorter, wider, more robust, and possibly mute people, right? Good. Another easy week. But man, I was wrong. I was really, really wrong. It turns out that the Neanderthal is a weird little man who, oddly enough, didn't even start out that little. Honing in at about 5'7" and 130 pounds for the men, and 5'3" and 115 pounds for the lady. Although these Neanderthals at the beginning were slightly taller, they remained awkwardly wide, or wider than previous ancestors and to ourselves. It is believed by some, in fact, that the wide, robust ribcage of Neanderthal could have come from Homo Heidelberg. Now, I say could have or possibly because it was at this point in my research where I came to the bulk of my problem. This here would be the vein of my existence. And what that is something that's called the muddle in the middle. Don't Google it right now because it's going to make your head spin for sure. As it turns out, the Neanderthal is a pretty hot topic among anthropology. There are a lot of debates around him, including things like who Neanderthal evolved from, and whether or not Neanderthal is just an entirely different species altogether. What the muddle in the middle refers to is a period of time in which Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and Homo Heidelberg coexisted. Evolutionarily speaking, they overlapped. Now, I want to be clear that Homo Heidelberg and Homo habilis never existed at the same time, like they never would have met. But Homo erectus arose in between them. Homo erectus arose with Homo habilis and faded away at the middle of the beginning of Homo Heidelberg. So with this information, you could imagine how possibly there could be some intermingling between these species. So what I'm about to present to you is a breakdown of the Neanderthal skeleton and why I found it hard to compare, or uncomparable in the way that it's just not comparable because it's just straight up different, not the same. And my own theory on the Neanderthals' physical extinction. My theory is based around the fact that Homo Heidelbergensis is our common ancestor. So let's get into it. There are some pretty big differences between the skull of Neanderthal and the skull of modern man. Right away, we can see a visual difference in appearance. Neanderthal skull is slightly sloped at the front, it's flattish throughout the top, and it's a bit long. We'll get to the shape of their skull in a little bit. First, let's start with the well-known facial features of Neanderthal. We notice that the optical orbits, or the eye sockets, are quite large. 6 millimeters larger on average, actually, and around them, distinctively, their infamous double-ridged brow ridge. Below the eyes, we have the Neanderthal's nose, and perhaps the most prominent feature on his face. The nose, averaging 29% larger than the nose of a modern human, could be crucial to how Neanderthals adapted and survived in the cold climates. As Allen's rules suggest, the nose was larger, and this could have been to help the Neanderthal to stay warm by creating a larger cavity to warm the air before taking it into the Neanderthal's body. This also allowed the Neanderthal to take in more air per breath, allowing the body more oxygen. Below the nose, we have their jaw, and their entire jaw is also jutted out to the front of their face, and is as equally as noticeable as their nose. And if examined, their front teeth commonly show signs of scratching, an indication that perhaps they use their mouth like a third hand sometimes. There was also a distinct difference in the bottom jaw. Along with the visual differences, it overall being robust and the complete lack of a chin, there was some differences in the teeth, particularly the molars, the third molar to be exact, in which between that and the back of the jaw was a substantial space. Now, we're going to get back to the football-shaped skull. If we look at the back of the skull, we can see this mass. If you feel the back of your own head, you'll feel that it's more or less round. Now take your hand and make a fist, and place that on the back of your head, like this. Now take your other hand and see how that new shape feels, as if your hand has now become part of your skull. That is the shape of a Neanderthal skull, and that lump is called the occipital bun. The reason for this bun could have been an adaptation needed for the attachment of their massive neck and their jaw muscle. If we continue to move around the bun down to the bottom portion of the skull, we could see an impression or a dent. This is what's known as the Cyprianic Fossa. This is where the large neck muscles would have attached to the actual head itself. Moving on, or down, we have Neanderthal's ribcage. And well, this guy's whole thorax was a hot mess and particularly unique. Though similar to our own in overall volume, it was an extremely different shape. It was drastically different looking from our own. If we look at it from the top, we can see that the spine is concave into the ribs. That is to say, the spine is nestled into the rib cage. The ribs were also extremely barrel-shaped and protruded out from its body, much like his face did. The barrel or bell shape of his ribs is due to the fact that the bottom of Neanderthal's rib cage is much larger than the top. The placement of the spine so deep into the thorax, along with the bulbous ribs, caused the Neanderthal to have less of a lower lumbar curve. In fact, they kind of didn't have one at all. Although the upper half of their spine was very similar to ours today. Below the spine in the rib cage, we have the hips. And right off the bat, again, we can see that they're overall larger and wider and more robust. We can see that the ilium is longer and wider, and from point to point is just overall bigger. The innominate bowl is much deeper and curved forward. And if we look at the sciatic notch, we can see that it is substantially deeper and quite a bit larger than that of modern human. Perhaps that was to support its massive leg muscles. The last thing that we'll look at regarding Neanderthal hips is his leg socket, and we can see how much bigger it is than in modern human today. But the largeness of this joint isn't unique to just the Neanderthal hips. Almost all of Neanderthal joints, particularly in his legs and arms, were oversized. And as a result, like mentioned earlier in our textbooks, Neanderthal commonly ended up with rheumatoid arthritis. In fact, that's a gene from Neanderthal that still carries on today. So if you or anyone you know has arthritis, you can thank a Neanderthal. Hi. Now that we're done with the basic breakdown of the Neanderthal skeleton, I want to get back to its physical extinction and a little bit about its migration. It's widely believed and accepted that Neanderthal and modern humans' common relative is Homo Heidelberg. As I mentioned, there is that muddle in the middle where all that, it's kind of unsure because fossils get vague. Some of them are really similar while some of them are really distinct. Another issue that the muddle in the middle brought up was that sometimes one classification is referred to by two different names. Like some people refer to the African version of Homo erectus as Homo Heidelbergensis, and so it was a bit of a hurdle to recognize which were actual species and which were just things with two names. But that being said, Homo Heidelbergensis was generally only ever called the Heidelberg man, so pretty similar. Homo Heidelberg was shown to have split into two distinct groups somewhere around 350 to 400,000 years ago. And what is speculated is that half of those people left Africa and arose to the Neanderthal, while the rest stayed and evolved into Homo sapien. What I propose happened is that before the first wave met the second wave, they met in the middle. So some of these second wave people already had Neanderthal blood in them by the time that they reached the Neanderthal. Before we do that, though, I want to highlight some of the evolutionary milestones of Homo Heidelbergensis, such as he was the first to make fire, and there's evidence of that in the way of hearths and fire pits. Homo Heidelberg was the first to hunt large game bigger than itself, four-legged things. Also the first to build structures, not find a cave and say, hey, that looks like a nice place. Homo Heidelberg actually could get stones and wood and make himself a place to live. Now, with all that being said, don't you think it's weird that Neanderthal is only associated with caves? So as I mentioned before, I believe that there was a back migration from the original first wave. That being that some of these first Neanderthals were going back towards Africa. Not necessarily to get back towards Africa, but just branching back out and also happened to be in that direction. That being said, there was also now second wave people leaving Africa, and I think they met, and I think that some Neanderthal blood was brought back to the Neanderthals. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in my personal research, I didn't find any examples of Neanderthal building houses. There was lots of discussion about how they could and their tool use and stuff, but I didn't see anything specifically about building dwellings, just them being in caves. But I did see lots of information about the later Neanderthal and Homo sapiens living together, or their fossils being found together. So now at this time it might be important to know a few other things about Neanderthals lifestyle. Like they didn't live very long. They didn't often live past 25 or 30. So that being said, like if they were having offspring, what was happening to their babies after the parents died? You'd either have a single parent household, which would have been exceptionally hard back then. It's hard enough now. Or that infant would have no parents and ultimately die. So, as a result of this, the Neanderthal population was never very large. It existed for a long time, but it was never a lot of Neanderthals. So it would have been easy to weed them out. It would have been easy for them to have been diluted. So what I propose happened is that these Homo sapiens came. Some of them had already have been mingling with Neanderthals and had the blood in them. I believe they came and they further mingled, and that made them more adaptable to the environmental changes that were going on with the weather and stuff like that. But the Neanderthals that stayed behind were having a hard time adapting, and that's what pushed them back into the cave. Imagine that the Neanderthal went through a lot of this. I believe what happened was the original Neanderthal went physically extinct because it could not compete with the environment and Homo sapien. It could not come out into the hot weather to learn how to survive and adapt, and therefore went extinct. But the Neanderthals that had bred earlier had the tools they needed to be able to stay out during the day. So, in conclusion, I want to leave you with one really intriguing thought.